So I'll just quickly introduce you, and I want to make sure that you're allowed to use as much of the time as possible. Asim Ali in the Provost Office, thank you for coming today. I'm happy to introduce Shawndra Bowers, who is interviewing for the position of Instructional Designer for Auburn Online, which is our function within the functions related to online learning within the Provost Office. Shawndra has a background in communication and marketing as well as instructional design. Currently works at Troy University and is responsible for Troy's all of their humanities courses, I believe, and sciences, and so I'm sure she'll be able to expound on that further. And we want to make this as interactive as possible as well, so please ask her questions. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon. Thank you all for coming. Again, Shawndra Bowers. Just a little bit background, I'm not going to spend much time. I have been in education for over a decade and a half at least. I started in K-12, teaching in the middle school. I've taught at high school. I've been at a couple of institutions where I was faculty. I taught undergraduate and graduate level courses both on ground and online. So I can relate to lots of experiences that you may have had on campus. Currently working with Troy University Instructional Design with the General Studies program. So I work across all colleges with all of the different core courses. So if you all have any questions throughout this presentation, please don't hesitate to stop me, ask questions at any time. A little caveat, there's like two parts to this talk today. The first part is kind of conceptual in nature, and the second part, we'll see if we get to. I just wanted to make you aware that it's kind of the concepts in action, and if we don't have time to get to that, I will make sure that I provide the presentation to Mr. Ali so that he can give it to you and you can take a look at the concepts and actions portion of that if we don't have time for that today. So my talk today, when we kind of discussed what is it that we'd like to, topic for discussion, was what is instructional design, how can it help you as faculty members, the students and their outcomes, the learning outcomes here at Auburn University. So I kind of thought about what is my approach to instructional design and how that could potentially play a part in the institution. So I'm going to talk about instructional design first in kind of broader context and then more specifically. So overview of instructional design, the collaborative model that I kind of subscribe to, and then we'll talk about participant roles, and the sample course is the second half of this that we may or may not get to. So you can see kind of those ideas in the course. So I like this quote right here that it basically says, online is different. It's different from your face-to-face. It requires instructors to kind of think differently about who their students are, how they approach their content, how they deliver that. And it requires some adaptation. And sometimes that's a little scary to do on your own. So that's kind of what an instructional designer can do to help, is to make that not as scary, not have you doing it alone, is to help you think through how can you adapt to the changing needs of the online environment. This is what planning an online course probably feels like when you first think about it. It's messy, what is it all? There's a lot to do, thinking about who are your learners, what do I need them to know, how am I going to deliver content, what content is it, how am I going to get feedback, how am I going to assess whether they're learning what they're supposed to be learned. There's a lot to think about, and it can get kind of jumbled up in your initial thinking process, and that's where I want to come in and kind of help as an instructional designer think through that process and make it a little bit easier. One of my guiding principles is that being a good teacher means that you not only have to be a content expert, but you have to also be a good communicator, a good organizer. You have to be able to integrate different media, different techniques, strategies for implementation of your activities, your assessments. So that's kind of one of my guiding principles, and that in the online environment, you really have to intentionally incorporate some of these instructional design principles that I'm going to talk to you about a little bit. So for those of y'all that are not familiar with ID. It's basically the development of specific learning and instructional theory to ensure quality instruction. That's really what it's all about. You know, we all want to make sure that we are analyzing the needs of our learners. What are the goals of our course? What are the outcomes that we want to, that we expect to get? How do we deliver that? You know, design and deliver that in a way that's most effective for the students that we have. And then certainly evaluation and making modifications with that feedback. How do I improve upon what I'm doing? Typically, historically, it's been a very systematic approach. You know, one of the classic instructional design models is called ADDIE, where you analyze, you design, you develop, you implement, and then you evaluate. Very systematic, very linear type of model. But in online education, that kind of systematic, step-by-step linear approach is there's a shift. You know, people are thinking more in terms of building, constructing, you know, feedback. It's getting a little bit broader than just step-by-step linear type of thinking. Some of the tenets of design that we've seen happen in course design is things like failure to engage the student. You know, when a course has been built, they think just because I have a discussion board in place and students respond, they're interacting through the discussion board, that my students are engaged. How many of y'all have students that will post to a discussion board and clearly you know they have not read the material? They post their response and they may respond to someone else and say, yeah, I agree. None of y'all have ever seen that happen before. So, you know, just having some interaction in place is not necessarily having students engaged with the course, engaged with the content. Focusing on the content rather than outcomes, and this happens sometimes when you're designing an online class, is that I have this great topic and this great activity that I do in my face-to-face class that I absolutely love, and I just want to do this, you know, in the online environment. But it might not necessarily work well online. It might not necessarily be achieving the outcomes for that particular course that you have, that you're working on. So you want to kind of focus on outcomes rather than the content. Another mistake that we see in course design as instructional designers a lot is just taking whatever it is that we're doing in the face-to-face class and kind of dumping it in the LMS. You know, so I take all of my traditional materials, my PDFs or documents, and just stick them in the online environment and say, hey, read those. Or having a PowerPoint in place and expecting the students to just go through the material in the PowerPoint and not really explaining what it is in detail. You know, they just look through the PowerPoint. So just taking what you're doing already and dumping it in an online environment is not always effective. So again, working with the designer to figure out what's going to work and how. And then failure to recognize the social nature of learning. There's a lot of literature that says online students sometimes feel isolated and alone. So, you know, having to incorporate some way for them to interact and engage with each other is very important in the online environment. All right, so that interaction piece that we build in as we talk about it is there's three different places where you want to build in interaction. One is with the content itself, you know, learning the content, understanding the content, with one another, that's that social piece that I was just mentioning, and then with the instructor, being able to interact with the instructor. And intentionally designing for all three of those kinds of interactions is very important to the success of students. Instructional designers tend to utilize principles of good practice. The 7 principles of good practice in undergraduate education, for example, started out with a rubric, and they had 8 tenets or 8 practices that were good. Things like having a course overview and an introduction, making sure that you specify what your learning objectives are, making sure you incorporate ongoing, formative, and summative, informal and formal types of assessments throughout the course, preparing learning resources and materials that are appropriate for online, you know, different media formats, for example, text, photographs, illustrations, video, audio. You want to incorporate all those different kinds of things in there. Making sure you have the learner interaction. Using appropriate technologies. You know, where does it make sense? What makes this more effective? Using the right technologies in the right situation. Certainly providing learner support and being conscious of accessibility. So those were the standards in the original rubric. And from there, organizations like Quality Matters have done further research. There's lots of literature out there on things that make good course design. All right, so of course, Quality Matters has these 8 tenets that look very similar to that rubric that was originally designed. So when you're getting ready to plan your online course, instead of that messy, messy diagram that we saw earlier, you know, you can think about in a little bit more organized in that you have your learning objectives, your goals, your student learning outcomes, whatever it is that you use in your department or in your course. From there, you look at your assessments. You know, how do I know my students got what they needed to get out of the class? You know, formative, summative, formal, informal, individual, and group. You know, you want to incorporate all of those into your assessment plan. Thinking about your instructional activities and considering the time workload balance. You know, for a 3-credit-hour course online, what does that mean? How much work should the student be doing? You want to analyze, you know, how much time. They're not going to have seat time, so how does that translate into work that they're doing in an online environment? So the designer can help you kind of think through that time workload balance. Identifying resources, whether those are open educational resources, whether those are instructor-created materials, whether those are publisher materials that you take and you modify and tweak and make them your own. So various different resources and making sure they're in different formats that address the needs of various types of learners. We know we have various learning styles who, you know, think about VARC, you know, visual, audio, you know, what kinds of learners you have in your class. You want to provide the different media formats to address all of those and make them accessible, you know. And then, of course, thinking about what technologies can make those things happen. So it makes it a little cleaner to think through the process. So that's kind of instructional design in general terms. More specifically, kind of my approach to instructional design is very collaborative. I use what's called a reflective recursive model. It's R2D2, if anyone has ever heard of that particular model. And this is kind of my visualization of how that works, right? It's not as messy as the first diagram we saw, but it's not quite as clean as that systematic approach of classic instructional design. This model says that instructional design is very participatory. You get your stakeholders all involved, and we'll talk about who those people are and what their roles and responsibilities are in the instructional design process. It's very reflective. So looking at what has been done, how well has it worked, what needs to be done, you know, looking at if you have survey data, if you have feedback, end of course evaluations, if you have performance data, you know, looking at what's worked, what hasn't worked, and how can we do it a little bit differently. It's very nonlinear. It doesn't mean I have to start at the beginning and end at the end, which sounds weird. I can start in the middle in instructional design if there's something in particular that we want to focus in on. There's a particular area of need, a challenge, a concept, a project. We can start in the middle and work, forwards or backwards within the course. It does not necessarily have to be linear, but it is almost always recursive. We're going to go back to one of these previous stages and involve different stakeholders, where we need to pull in more people. We may realize once we've gotten into this project that we need a simulation. We need some kind of multimedia content that the team that we currently have in place is not able to do. So we need to bring in another team member to make that happen. We may have to circle back to the reflection. We said these were the needs. Now that we're into it, we realize that was more of a symptom rather than the core problem. Students aren't reading the syllabus. Well, they aren't reading the syllabus because there's some other underlying problem that we've kind of come to realize in our discussion. So we circle back to our underlying assumptions of what we've done. So it's very recursive throughout this process. So I'm going to touch on these really quickly. So participatory, some of the stakeholders that might be involved in this collaborative design process would be, of course, the faculty member that's teaching the course. Sometimes that's an individual faculty member, and sometimes it's a committee. You have a group of faculty members who are going to design a course that will be utilized, across a couple of different sections, and they kind of come up with ideas that, oh, this is what I've done, and someone else has done something different. This is what I feel is important in terms of what the big ideas are, what's most important for my students to take away from this course. So they kind of all come together and collaborate and talk about those things. You may have additional subject matter experts in addition to the faculty here on campus. You may consult with faculty members at other institutions. You may have experts in the field, that come and collaborate with that group. The instructional designer and sometimes trainer, that could be the same person, it could be a different person in some cases, will all work together in this instructional design process. And at the center of it all is the student. Everything that you think through and decide upon is supposed to be student-centered. It's really important to really know and understand who that student is. What's the purpose of this course? Who's going to be enrolled in it? What do they look like? What are their needs? How can I address their needs academically and non-academically? So all of those things are really important to know. Love this by Paloff and Pratt. Successful learners in the online environment need to be active, creative, and engaged in the learning process. So how do you do that? And I know as an instructor, you're like, they want me to do what? And how am I supposed to get that done? What if I don't do this right? And that's kind of what, as a designer, we're here to help think through those steps and provide the connection to the resources that you need to make it a success. So in the reflection process, this is just an example. And the example that I'm going to give you is from a English world literature course, okay? That's the sample that we have for the concepts and application that hopefully we'll get to. But in reflection, during the planning process, one of the first things that I subscribe to is sitting down and having a conversation with the faculty member or the committee. What are some of the problems that you've had with this course in the past? What are some challenges that you faced? What are some things that have worked well that you want to continue? So we kind of talk through those issues. So you see on the left-hand side are some notes from a conversation I had with this world literature teacher. She said, the students don't read the syllabus. I don't know how do I get them to review the syllabus? Or students don't know where to go to get to things. How do I make sure that they know how to navigate the course effectively? That way they're not spending a lot of time navigating, they're spending their time doing the work that needs to be done. Building community in the course between the students. How do I get them to really open up and have a dialogue that is deeper, than, yeah, I agree. Having really critical thinking conversations. So once you sit down and kind of talk through those things, what is it that you want to accomplish in this design or this redesign? Providing some thoughts. Here's some examples of things that can be done to meet that particular need, to meet that challenge, to resolve that problem. Providing some ideas and thinking through, okay, are you comfortable with that? If you're not comfortable with that, how can we tweak that? What can we do to meet your comfort level that's still effective? So providing some starting point of conversation, continued conversation with the faculty member or committee. From that point, focusing on what your goals, objectives, outcomes are, and curriculum alignment, and I'll get to that in just a second, but having your specific course objectives and SLOs, and then what activities, task mastery, assignments, whatever you want to call them, that meet those particular objectives or outcomes, and how do I make sure that students have learned those things. So you see an example here of the second bullet here. Was to develop an understanding of a work's relevance to its historical and social context. So as they're reading in this world literature course, how does the world around that author, how did that shape that literary work? Specific SLO was articulating the ways literature reflects the historical period and the culture that produced it. So those two pieces align together. Of course, there were videos that students were able to watch that correlated to that information, but they were asked to create a historical tour of the literary work that they read. For example, the Odyssey. You know, identifying where were the different places that were traveled in the Odyssey, pinning those in Google Earth. Anybody here familiar with Google Earth? Free? Yeah, so pinning those places, creating push pins that talked about that culture, that time period, how that influenced that piece of work, and how it was addressed in that piece of literature. And then having a rubric was the assessment to make sure that they are indeed able to articulate, because they had to narrate this tour. They're able to articulate how that piece of literature was the history and culture was reflected in that piece of literature. So making sure that your outcomes are addressed is one of the things that we hope to do. Certainly, as you were talking through this process, you know, part of my role is to make sure that I bring effective instructional design and instructional strategies to the table. You know, if one of your goals is to make sure that students are able to have a conversation about whatever the topic is, which one of these instructional strategies is going to be most effective in allowing them to have those kinds of conversations. We talked a little bit earlier today about a tool called VoiceThread, right? And VoiceThread allows students to not have a threaded discussion, but really have a conversation where the content is the center of what's being talked about, you know, and it visualizes that discussion. So what strategies are going to meet your particular outcomes or objectives, and what methods and tools are available to make that happen? You know, that's kind of what I'm supposed to do to provide support to you. That's my responsibility as the designer. And then I think I kind of touched on curriculum alignment a little bit, and really thinking through, like I said, the goals, the objectives, the task, the timing. So getting into this detailed plan. If we plan it out very well ahead of time at the very beginning, the development of it becomes a breeze. The facilitation of it becomes a breeze. It's really thinking through all of these different aspects early on in the process. And then, like I said, it's nonlinear and recursive, and this can be any stage, you know, the planning of it, the development of the course, the implementation. You know, we get into the course and it's actually being facilitated, and you realize, oh, we didn't tell the students how to do some particular task, and we have to come back and make sure that we outline that in a lot more detail. Hopefully, if we've done the planning process well enough that we don't, you know, that's not an issue. But you know, it could happen, you know, that we miss this particular thing, or we find that we thought they would know how to do this, but they didn't quite get it. So, you know, giving a little bit more detailed instruction. So this kind of idea of it being nonlinear and going back to any stage of the process, and, you know, recycling through the design of the course, support revision, that can happen at any stage. All right, so what I'd like to do really quickly is a little think, pair, share activity. Let's see, how much time do I have? About 5 minutes. Okay, so if I can get you all to work in little groups. So we've got 3 over here, we've got 3 right here, we've got 3 right here, and 3 or 4 if Awesome wants to participate. What I'd like for you to do is to think about the R2D2 model that I just talked about, this collaboration piece. Think about that model and whether or not, you know, will that work here at this institution? If it is, talk to the people in your little group and who would need to be involved, you know, what people for your course or your department, what people would need to be involved, what departments might need to be involved, you know, what pieces of the puzzle do you see that need to fit together to make that work, and what challenges do you see in making that happen? And then we'll get you all to share out like the one most interesting thought or idea that came out of that discussion. So can we take maybe, I know we're limited on time, maybe 3 minutes to kind of talk through that. I know that's short, but.
I have a question.
Yes?
No. For us first.
Yeah. Oh, okay. And I'll walk around if anybody has questions for me. Can I walk? Do anybody, y'all have any questions about that model? I need to go back to the model, don't I?
Okay. So I think we have something similar in place. I'm interested to hear about it. I mean, we can breeze through like what's your challenges that you guys see.
Which is why if you should get some
Those that are low get pulled up.
if we're going to attract some best people, and we have
As you know, we're just about to launch Brother Sciences of Health, but we have our team, first of all, is a public-private partnership involved. One of our people has a PhD in education psychology, and she's published multiple papers in instructional design. It's been very, right now, it's just theory, because we are, right now, the website is active, and we're talking to the Netherlands, 4 different institutions, China, 1 in India, and then 6 different institutions across the United States.
You don't know which
Possible licensing. This doesn't have classes, or course, excuse me, is put together with based
dog learning new tricks
with online concepts like stickiness. And so the idea is yeah. So but it's and so parts of the lectures, the voice overs.
Well, this is for undergraduate.
No, right.
Professionals in the area, it's a science.
Yeah, so you need to have that feedback piece of every person.
That's interesting. Was a big plus in small labs that since you can't do it for one semester, eventually you get used to do the same thing. Do it like you do. But then you next first time you're 16, what you wrote. I don't know if it's going to be a little chat, but it's the same thing.
Right.
I hope not.
We encourage our faculty to, we do a formal survey at the end of the courses about the design of the courses, but we also encourage them to do more informal kinds of surveys during the course. We really encourage them to do them before the midterm to see, how the students are progressing, how they feel about it, what's beneficial to them, what they feel they're still needing or lacking, and if you do it before the midterm, you can make adjustments before it's too late for that student to be successful. Make adjustments early on. So we kind of encourage that. I heard y'all talking about the student feedback piece, We make informal observations, but sometimes if you, do a kind of survey, you ask, you get something a little bit different than what you're observing. So.
The technical challenge would be that you might recognize that you want a particular technology based on how the students are consuming your course, but you may recognize that later in the design.
Shall we do the 1 minute bail?
Society for Theory of Technology, medicine. independently. We have veterinary students that come with all kinds of really good backgrounds in this area. If only we had a standard, well, guess what? This content is based on the number one textbook in the field. It's used in over 150 universities globally. So it's going to become the standard. And then we've engaged, we've tested it, it's been funded through the Small Business Innovation Research Program through the Department of Education, 1,400 students at actually around the country, and over 24 faculty from all over the country. Has contributed to the review of units with the idea of, is the content appropriate, is it aimed too high or too low, or the test questions are appropriate? So, but it's taken us really from the day it was first conceived, it's been 60 years of it. It's been at least 2 years.
Right, ding, 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 ding.
You gonna get emails at 2 in the morning?
Well, I love to have to try to get people's attention because that means they're really engaged in their conversation. And I hate to stop you in the middle, but for time's sake, I want to give each group an opportunity to take a minute to talk about what you all discussed in your group. Maybe perhaps, what was, I'll go back to the slide where I tasked you. Yeah. So, what parties do you think would need to be involved in this process, and what challenges do you think that you might face? So, I won't pick any group in particular. Anybody want to volunteer to go first? I saw the hand here first.
I think we really looked at your model in terms of thinking about who the audience is, and that in fact the entire instructional design model that you apply could be very different whether if you're actually targeting matriculated Auburn students versus designing something that could be used across the world. And because there's a whole bunch of other stuff that comes into it at that level. And so there's an example in the College of Vet Med, they are in fact designing something that could be used for both purposes, and all kinds of other considerations come into that case.
So what did you feel like was the challenge where that model might not particularly fit the...
It can fit and be used, but I think the requirements in terms of time, resource, investment go up tremendously if you're trying to reach the world versus just reach an audience of, let's say, Auburn students.
Right. So your participatory team would have to expand.
Exactly. External technologies, external expertise come in to supplement.
So in the example, without going into the specifics in the example, I think we have over 24 universities, multiple countries. We've tested this with over 1,400 students globally. Because we're trying to get there.
Right.
Can we reach the audience or not? What are the problems? We won't know yet, but we're about to find out. It's a little terrifying.
That's that reflective piece. So you're having to look at your data and performance and feedback from your instructors, feedback from the people that built the course. You're taking that and reflecting on it. And then that's going to feed back into how you maybe modify the course in the future and roll it out.
The broader your audience, the harder it is to tailor your course for that audience. They're very broad and mixed group.
So there's a concept in instructional design called universal design. So you kind of design for everyone in mind. So when I deliver content that, in an example like what you're giving now, I design content so that it may be delivered in print for those people who learn best through reading. I may deliver it through audio for people who are on the move and they want to listen to it as they're jogging or they're on the treadmill or whatever. I may deliver it in video because people need to see it and hear it at the same time. I may deliver it through a simulation. So I have the same content, the same concept, but it's delivered in multiple ways so that universally, no matter what kind of learner I have, what culture it is, that I'm addressing their particular needs. So, and you can take that idea of universal design and not only apply it to content delivery, but also to activities and to assessments. So certainly that's something we think about when we're discussing developing that kind of course. Another group? Okay.
So we talked about this in conjunction with core courses. Kind of going into the audience group there a little bit as well, but from our perspective, from what we have seen, how vital it is to get the administration into the discussion as well. Whether that is the program coordinator, whether that is the department chair, whoever it is in the department who's running assessment, who is running SLOs, the student learning outcomes, to make sure that the faculty member who is involved in the design of the course really knows what those are. I mean, we all think we know what they are towards them. But if I pointed to one of you and say, tell me what SLO 7 is, would you be able to? Yeah. So, to bring that in as early in the design process as possible so that it becomes second nature, essentially. And then bring those results back to the administration to remind them that in order to do this well, we cannot explode class size because it just, it's online, so we don't have to worry about how big a class it is.
Right. The time it takes to interact, that content student instructor interaction, the time it takes to do that, there has to be the resources available. So if more students means there needs to be more resources as well. Certainly I can relate to the idea of everyone knowing what those SLOs are. I'm not sure how you onboard new faculty and who's responsible for providing them with the syllabus, but if it's another faculty member who's, I added this objective to my particular syllabus, or I got mine from another professor who had also modified it a little bit. It's like the game where you whisper something in somebody's ear, and by the time it gets to the end, it's something totally different, right? So, as the syllabi are passed around and over time, they change a little bit, so you're not quite sure which of these were official and worded. It's funny if you go to STARS and look at what the STARS agreement has versus what's in the syllabus, how closely do those things match? So it's really important, that you do have that clear understanding. What is it that this course's goals are? What are the objectives? What are the outcomes from the very beginning? Everybody knows that. What are the official ones? All right. Another group?
Well, first of all, this was a very interesting exercise. Thanks for suggesting it. It was a good discussion. I think we focused on probably the reflective piece more than anything else. We're so steeped in how we do instruction right now. You stand up in front of people and blah, 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 and then expect them to absorb it, that we're just not sure how to do it any other way. And so I guess from our perspective, it's hard for us to get past that initial hurdle of here are all the different ways in which you can engage students as opposed to just talking to them or meeting them after class and things like that. And I think that was perhaps the most substantive conversation that we had. It involved how does an instructional designer work with us as faculty in doing that type of thing.
So it kind of addressed, and we talked about this at lunch a little bit, but there's so many different tools, there's so many strategies out there that you could use, but I think the key when you're working with the team, the collaborative team, is the instructional designer helping you realize what is it you want to accomplish and honing in on what are the tools or strategies that are effective online for that particular thing that you want to accomplish, rather than saying, well, here's all the stuff you could do, which becomes overwhelming, and you decide, well, I don't want to do it because that's just too much. Let's focus in on what is it that we want to accomplish here. And here are some proven, research-based, effective strategies. Here's some proven tools that have been in place over time. Here's some of your peers that have, either at this institution or other institutions who've incorporated this and it's worked well. So we've got some best practices that we can, showcase. So I think just honing in and focusing on what it is that you want in that particular course, and rather than just saying the just in time rather than the just in case approach, in case you want to use this.
I just would reinforce what you just said. The course that we are about to launch, so who knows, next year we'll tell you if any of this worked, right? But one of the people that we work with in the private sector is, in fact, has a PhD in education psychology and is an instructional designer. And she has taught me, at least, and others that I work with, that there is a literature out there. And frighteningly, it's some of it teaches us that the blah, 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 I stand and deliver for 45 minutes is not as effective as we think it is. It's just traditional. And so there is a literature out there.
I didn't say that. But that was recorded, right?
I know it's not effective. But I imagine a challenge that you face is gaining the trust of the person who's putting together the course and that type of thing. Can you talk maybe just a little bit how you work to gain trust?
So relationships are very important. Establishing relationships, opening dialogue, understanding, that particular faculty member, their discipline, what they're tasked with doing, and being able to talk through that. So relationship is the first part of that, and open communication. Also being able to kind of talk about experiences and what things have worked well in the past, so I think if I can help you see what is it you want to do, what things I've already, can bring to you from the literature or from other, institutions or from your peers, kind of help you work through that. I think that building that relationship and that knowledge base, I think you would trust me as a faculty member if I can show you that I kind of know what it is that I'm doing, from an instructional design perspective, just like I trust that you're the content expert and you know your subject matter and you're going to bring, appropriate content to the table. And we have that mutual respect and trust in the things that we're able, our strengths and our skills, and bring those to the table. So just establishing relationship, I think, is just the most important thing with the faculty member. Yes, sir. Last group.
So we started our discussion focused a little bit on the recursive part of the model, and Daryl said the big plus that this model brings us is that feedback part. And so from there we moved to one of the phantom constituencies in the design process, maybe students themselves. And then Paul mentioned that although its recursiveness is good and getting feedback in time to make small changes to support learning is important. Don't be too recursive in terms of bringing in technical expertise to create some kind of artifacts. So for instance, someone who wants to do an online lab a week before the course launches says, we need a virtual lab for our students, right? So don't be too recursive in that way. Do you know what I mean? Don't wait too long. So
absolutely.
We had a nice rangy discussion about the importance of feedback and how the feedback helps target where in the process you need to return to make improvement.
Absolutely. I think a part of what you bring out is that the recursive part of that can be short, it can be very long. So it can be, we've delivered this course twice now for 2 semesters. Now let's look back at the feedback that we've been getting and see what adjustments we need to make. And now we can do that virtual lab. We can't do that a week before the course is scheduled to be taught. But if that was something that did come up in conversation, we're going to task that for when we reflect back on the course and make our improvements and our modifications. That's on our list of things that need to be done to it. So taking the feedback both from students and from instructor observation, or the challenges that they faced when they were teaching the course, to go back into that recursive process is going to vary depending on what course you're working with and lots of other factors. But yeah, definitely.
Could you talk a little bit about the timeline that you would envision? So if I came to you today, never taught online before, and said, okay, I want to do this.
Never taught online before.
Never taught online.
And we're working on just your course only. So there would need to be enough time, first of all, for us to do the planning consultation piece. And again, that's a scheduling thing, how long, how long it takes us to get together and have this conversation. Some of that can be done virtually, through email, and I have forums that I have that start the thinking process. You know, so all of these steps that we had in here about the objectives and the assessments and what are your resources and things like that, you know, you can go ahead and kind of fill that out to get your juices flowing about what it is that you want to do. But, you know, that'll take some time to work through that process. Definitely, if you've never taught online, we definitely want to make sure that you have some training. Training both in technology and pedagogy, because the pedagogy online is going to be slightly different than the pedagogy would be in classroom pedagogy or andragogy, whichever one that you refer to. So we'll make sure you have some training. You know, that could be individualized one-on-one. It might be workshops that are offered, you know, courses that you go through. It depends on your personal skill level and what it is that you want to try to accomplish. So again, that's going to vary a little bit. And then
my course starts August 17th.
And you want to start today? So as a designer, you know, I'm going to say, you know, I'm so excited that you're ready to do this, but if you want to do this effectively and you want to be successful and you want your students to be successful, I don't think that August 17th is a realistic date for us to roll out. We can certainly begin the process now of planning, discussion, training, identifying resources, building assessments, developing the course. We can certainly start that now. But I think that the January whatever date is going to be a more realistic goal for us to target. But it could be anywhere from 6 weeks, and that's really pushing it. And I'd say for someone who's never taught online, I wouldn't even try to push it 6 weeks. 6 weeks to 3 months, you know, it might take us 3 months to work through all of the things that you need to work through. It just depends on how many people are involved and how much is already in place, how much is going to have to be developed, how much training is going to have to take place. So it's hard to put a number on because of circumstances, because all those are different. Individual versus what we call master courses, where there's a committee of people, you know, this worldwide distribution course, that's going to be a lot longer development than my individual one section course that we're talking about. So that's, you know, going to vary. I said the 6 weeks to 3 months for individual, and certainly not for the kind of course that you're talking about.
The person who was driving it in this case, and that was not me, I'm part of this team, at one point got a Department of Education Small Business Innovative Research grant, and that was what helped test this thing on a national scale, and then best practices evolved out of that, and so forth and so on. So yeah, in that case, it was years, actually.
Right. 6 months to a year at least.
Once the course is online and up and running, what does your role become? How long do you stay active?
So there's a lot of support in terms of instructional designer when the course rolls out to make sure that the things that we plan and develop, that they're rolling out effectively, that we didn't have tweaks, we didn't miss things, you know, providing the instructor with support, providing resources for the student support. You know, the instructional designer doesn't necessarily provide student support, but helps to support the faculty in where do they go for answers, where do they direct students for additional assistance, those kinds of things. So the longer that an instructor teaches a course, you know, if this is the 3rd time I've taught the course, there's going to be less support from the instructional designer because we kind of worked through the tweaks, the kinks, and we kind of worked those out, and the course has become, you know, smooth and efficient and what we intended for it to be, until we slate the time where we want to go back and reflect on the results of, you know, what the instructor is experiencing, what the students are experiencing, and where do we need to make modifications. So that would be a predetermined timeline as to when we want to revisit that feedback. But heavy support, the heaviest support is on the front end, and then it tapers off the longer that course is implemented. Yes, ma'am.
What kind of support personnel do you see this position needing? Or I know it would depend on the number of courses, the growth, but as far as maybe you've looked at other universities that are starting things like this, can you talk a little bit about that?
from.
Are you a one-man show?
Yes, I can do everything. No, and again, like you said, it depends on the growth and the number of courses that you're responsible for. But certainly, eventually, having a collaboration or a resource person that can help to develop materials, whether those are multimedia materials. So I don't know how much of this will be in place that you can pull from other resources or need to be specifically for this task at hand, but having someone who can help instructors. I want to take this really abstract, difficult concept and turn it into a captivate or storyline or simulation that's going to work. As a designer, that's probably not something that my skill set is going to be best utilized for. Certainly could do it, but it would take me longer than someone who's an expert in multimedia creation, so to speak. Certainly having someone who can train. The training is, faculty development is a key piece. So whether that's, collaboration amongst other folks, or a dedicated person, whatever that might be, having that training piece in there, because I think that's really essential to the success of any faculty member who's teaching online, especially if they're first time teaching online, really having a comfort level with the tasks and the technologies, both of those things. So I'm trying to think what else. In terms of support, having someone who can be kind of a help desk, so to speak. I'm teaching online, my designers help me with this. I just have a really quick question about how you insert this video in this course. Just having someone that they can contact in terms of help. And again, that you may already have that resource, but making that available to your instructors who are going online is really important. Somebody I can ask a quick question. I don't necessarily need training, I don't necessarily need a designer to redesign anything. I just need to know how to do this thing, and it shouldn't take long. So those are kind of some of the resources that I think would be helpful. So I figured we probably wouldn't get to the sample course and the world literature example that I was showing with the planning phase. I actually have slides. I hid them because I figured we wouldn't get to it. I hid them for this presentation, but they show the planning that we went through and what that looked like when it was finished, the finished product. So I show screenshots of how we address these various needs, challenges, and outcomes that we wanted to achieve in the screenshots on there, and showed you kind of the tools and what that looked like. So I'll provide that, unhide them, and provide that for you to be able to look at in a little bit more detail so you can see my concepts in action. Are there any other questions? I think we had quite a few then. Any other questions for me?
Do you have any questions for us?
That was, that kind of caught me off guard there. I've been asking questions all day, so I wasn't expecting a question at this point in time. How many of y'all actually are currently teaching a class online? I'd be curious to know. Currently.
Not alone, but yes.
You're in that national, international?
Yeah.
Okay. It's almost like you hate to use this word, but it's almost like a MOOC.
Yeah, it basically is. We have a partnership with a private company that is a public-private partnership situation, and it actually works in principle. The cost of this course, production of the course, including funding for setting up the technology, has been over $2.5 million, and the cost of producing the course for online launch has been over $400,000, but it's all been absorbed by the private partner and their expertise. And so we have a handshake with this company that says, and we're going to help, because we're the academics, they're a private company over here with some scientists involved. And we're going to help them dig out, but we don't have to pay them up front all that money. And So there's a plan, and we've been marketing on a global basis, and we already have customers lined up for the launch. So it'll be something between exciting and terrifying to see what happens next.
I've talked a couple of times today about this concept of unbundling the faculty role, where faculty have very specific roles and responsibilities when they're working in a larger class setting like that. Do you all have specific roles and responsibilities in that course that are unique?
Well, again, at the risk of going off topic here, we have several different ways. The traditional way it can be used is a student in the world can sign up to take the course for credit from Auburn. Okay? But the way that we probably will use it most based upon the feedback we've had is by licensing the course to institutions or entities like the University of Wisconsin or the Netherlands. The Netherlands are talking to us right now, where they would pay a license per seat. So say they have 100 students in the Netherlands that are going to take it every year. There's an amount of money per seat. They would pay that amount of money. They would license the course and be akin to buying a textbook. And they would have unfettered access to the course for the calendar documented time. And so then the instructor of record could say, okay, I'm going to use the course in this way, flip my classroom, or have my students go and use this as an adjunct to my own lectures, or however they might choose to use it. Another one would be certificate credit, where a person isn't looking for an academic grade from Auburn, but certification they completed and passed the course. And that might be a one-off individual, or it might be a company that wants their people working in this discipline to have a certification from Auburn that they passed. And if they make a grade of 70, they pass. But if they make a grade higher, they get a certificate with they pass with an 85 or pass with 100, that kind of thing. And so there are, in fact, entities now out there that want, for example, private entities that want to train the courses in the reproductive sciences and arts, assisted reproductive technology. So there are people out there that need to have formal coursework in this area to be certified. So that's another area. So we actually expect that our responsibility in terms of actually having office hours, virtual office hours, and all that kind of thing will be minimal relative to you have licensed the course, knock yourself out. You know, at Troy University, you're welcome to use it.
Right. Okay.
Shawndra, I've got a question. You know, the course that Dr. Bartol is talking about is in reproductive sciences. You know, we've got computer science faculty here. You know, on a campus like Auburn, there are broad ranges of just disciplines. What do you say to a faculty member who says, well, you know, I've worked with an instructional designer, but she's not an expert in my field. How do you approach that?
So it goes back to that mutual understanding and respect, building that relationship with that faculty member so that they understand what my role is, in that I'm not bringing to the table the content. That is your area. You are the subject matter expert, and you know, I trust that you know, are going to bring the appropriate materials to the table. Versus what I do is the strategies, the alignment, the helping you through the thinking process, helping you through the design and development process. You know, that's my area of expertise. You know, I'm an expert in design, whereas you're the expert in the content, and we'll partner together. So I don't have to know the content. What I have to know is where to go and find out what's working in reproductive technologies or reproductive sciences, what's working in online in other areas. So if there's any literature out there that says, you know, this is what we've tried and this worked or this didn't work, then I need to be able to find those resources and bring those to the table in terms of strategies and technologies and techniques that are used, whereas you bring the content to the table. So that is just building that knowledge of what our roles and responsibilities are.
Related to that, at the Big Yo Center, we're starting some ongoing research about the impact of redesign efforts on faculty vitality. And I wondered if you've done any research on your impact on colleagues once you work with them on the process, right? Mm-hmm. So over time, do they internalize that process and become more savvy at designing several different ranges of courses that they're teaching? Do you see what I'm saying?
I do.
And would you be interested in collaborating on that?
I'd love to. I have not done any formal research in that regards. I can give you anecdotal examples of where that has happened, and I've seen it in observation. For example, I'll give you one. I had a history professor. She's an adjunct. She taught on ground. She did IVC, and she was being tasked with developing the survey, a survey course. She was tasked with doing 2 survey courses in one semester, another different one the next semester, another different one. So you imagine the very first time she was a skeptic. She was not excited about having to develop these survey courses online because she'd been teaching them online. So she's not very technology savvy. So I worked very closely with her the first go around. I mean, it's been hours, you know. I sit in cubicles currently, and when I'd answer the phone and the people around me heard me say, "Hey, Dr. Such and Such," they'd be, "Okay, y'all, you know you're not gonna be able to talk to Shawndra for the next hour, 2 hours, because she's gonna be on the phone," you know, kind of talking through, "Here's what we're gonna try, here's why we're gonna try it, you know, here's how you do it." I do, you know, that one-on-one training through our synchronous session. It took many hours to get that done, and to her satisfaction and effective all at the same time. Worked a little bit more with her the next semester because it was a different course, but she was kind of getting, okay, well, can we do this because we did this the last time? Yes, we can continue doing that same type of strategy in this course because it was the second half of that course. So that makes sense, you know, to use that same strategy. Well, I do something a little different in my own ground class for this one, which is, you know, this project. Can I do that? So yes, we can build something different into this one as well. She has now developed 6 online courses over the last year and a half. And by the time she got to the 3rd or 4th course, she didn't even need me anymore. She's just building them on her own. I mean, you know, she'll call or email sometimes and say, "I had this idea. I think I want to try this. What do you think?" You know, and I'll work with her on that particular thing. But in terms of overall the whole process, she's kind of got it now. She's rolling with it, you know. And this was somebody who was a skeptic of online and who was not technology savvy, and she has 6 courses under her belt. So that kind of thing, you know, I've not done any formal research, but I can see that being a great study.
Any other questions? Please.
Do you find or how would you approach dealing with, you have somebody who's very adamant on particular technologies, you've got a professor who loves their PowerPoint and their Flash. How do you get them to realize that some of their incoming students have literally written all the papers in high school on their cell phone?
Right, so again, and I sound like a broken record sometimes, so you have to forgive me, but it really starts with that initial conversation. At the very beginning, you really have to help that faculty member think through who their audience is, and what you know, that slide up there, know your students, and understand what their needs are, what learning styles they are, what, you know, academic and non-academic types of needs and desires and trends. Your particular course may be a little different than somebody else's particular course, but if you really understand and know your student, and know what it is that you want to accomplish, we can figure out what's the most effective way of doing it. And maybe PowerPoint is not the most effective way of doing it. Let's consider, you know, this group of students coming out of high school have used their cell phones for everything. You know, there's some web-based programs, or there may be an app that these particular group of students, because of their trend, you know, the trend of that particular audience, you know, might work better for them. So how about we try this with this, you know, this one thing and see how it works, and perhaps we'll have some success and be able to build on that success for other things. So I think it's really the conversation is the start, and then building on small baby steps and successes.
Any other questions? Thank you, Shawndra, for the presentation, for the talk today. Thank you to all of you for coming out as well. Because of the RFID chip, we were able to email you automatically links. But I did email all of you links on feedback, so please do take a moment sometime before the end of the weekend, the coming weekend, to send some feedback so we can make an informed decision with the search committee. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming.